relentless, indifferent buzz of fluorescent lights hung above, casting a stark, uncompromising glare across the polished hardwood. This wasn't just a room. It was the crucible where petty grievances went to be judged, televised, and dissected by millions. The air was thick, heavy not with humidity, but with the expectation of conflict. He strode to the podium, a man named Marcus Wallace. He wore his indignation like a poorly fitting suit, loud, aggressive, and entirely calculated. Wallace was presenting a claim of negligence against a small business owner, demanding compensation that far exceeded the actual damages. His entire strategy rested on volume, emotional theatrics, and overwhelming the court with manufactured complexity. He saw the woman seated high on the bench, the famed Judge Judy, as nothing more than an obstacle to be bypassed with sufficient noise. "Your Honor," Wallace began, his voice already strained with righteous fury, "what happened to me was a complete disregard for my rights as a paying customer. This woman, this defendant, failed to uphold her duty. She promised a service. I paid the deposit and then—" He slammed a sheaf of papers onto the railing, the sudden sharp impact echoing loudly in the tense silence of the studio. And then she delayed. She misrepresented, and she ruined a vital business deal costing me tens of thousands. He leaned in, fixing his eyes on the judge, searching for any flicker of sympathy, any momentary impatience he could exploit. The cameras were rolling, capturing every beat of sweat and every dramatic gesture. This was his stage, and he was convinced the louder he performed, the bigger his payout would be. The defendant, a quiet woman with worry lines etched deep around her eyes, flinched visibly at the aggressive outburst. But the judge, she did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She did not tap her pen. She simply sat, entirely still, looking down over the rim of her glasses. Her posture was one of absolute, unshakable neutrality. The silence that followed Wallace's tirade was not an absence of sound. It was an active pressure, a vacuum that sucked all the heat out of the room. It was the silence of a predator assessing prey. Wallace, mistaking her stillness for confusion or weariness, pressed his advantage. He launched into a lengthy, often repetitive monologue about the emotional distress, the hypothetical loss of future profits, and the alleged incompetence of the defendant. He spoke for 3 minutes without interruption, his voice modulating between wounded victim and roaring prosecutor. The camera zoomed in on the judge's face. No expression, only the slow, steady movement of her eyes, tracking across the documentation laid before her. She was not listening to his performance. She was cross-referencing his statements against the cold, hard text of the evidence. Wallace reached the climax of his argument, his voice hitting a false, soaring note of pathos. "And so, Your Honor, I am asking for the maximum amount allowed under the statutes of this court. I deserve justice for this gross negligence." He finished and took a dramatic breath, waiting for the swift, validating ruling he felt was owed to him after such an impressive display. Instead, the judge picked up a single sheet of paper from the stack. She held it delicately, almost dismissively between 2 fingers. It was one of Wallace's own exhibits, the signed service agreement. Her voice, when it finally cut through the studio's humid stillness, was low, measured, and perfectly level. It was the sound of bedrock. It required absolute quiet to be heard, and everyone instinctively leaned forward. "Mr. Wallace," she began, pronouncing his name with clinical precision. She did not use the title, "Sir." "You claim repeatedly that the defendant's delay in delivery ruined your vital business deal. You maintain that this delay was a week, specifically." Wallace nodded quickly, eagerly. "Yes, 7 days. The date was immutable, Your Honor." She tilted her head slightly, peering at the document. "And this delay occurred, you state, in the 3rd week of last month?" "Correct," Wallace confirmed, folding his arms smugly. The judge placed the document flat on the bench. The tiny crisp sound of the paper smoothing out felt deafening. "Please direct your attention to paragraph 4, subclause C," she instructed, her gaze never leaving his. "The clause you initialed. It defines the acceptable parameters for delivery. Please read the 2nd sentence of that subclause for the court." Wallace paused. His aggressive confidence flickered, replaced by a sudden wariness. He hadn't expected to be grilled on the fine print. He fumbled slightly, picking up his copy, his eyes darting across the page. "Read it, Mr. Wallace," she repeated, the tone now holding a hint of steel. Not anger, just absolute command. He cleared his throat. "It says, if circumstances necessitate a scheduling adjustment, And then it continues. The service provider must give 48 hours written notification, and the adjusted date shall not exceed 10 business days beyond the original agreement. He stopped reading, looking up hesitantly. He still didn't see the trap. The judge lifted her hand, pointing to the agreement with an economy of motion that spoke volumes. Look at the date on the defendant's submitted email chain, Exhibit B. Wallace quickly shuffled to the next exhibit. His breathing became noticeably shallower. The defendant gave notice in writing, informing you of the necessary adjustment on the 22nd day of the month, the judge stated, providing the date herself, clearly having analyzed every detail long before Wallace began his performance. That is 4 business days before the original due date. 4 days, Mr. Wallace.
Is 4 business days more or less than the 48 hours notice required in the contract you signed? Wallace hesitated, unable to speak. The courtroom was now completely silent, save for the hum of the lighting and the almost imperceptible whir of the cameras. Answer the question, Mr. Wallace, she pressed. He managed a strangled word. More. It is significantly more, the judge affirmed, her voice utterly devoid of emotion, operating solely within the bounds of contractual law. The defendant complied perfectly with the notice requirement you agreed to. She paused, letting that reality sink in. Wallace's face was beginning to drain of color. He started to realize that his grand theatrical claim, based on a week of delay, was about to shatter against the cold reality of a 48-hour clause he had overlooked. Now about the delay itself, the judge continued, her attention pivoting to the final, devastating point. The defendant's delivery occurred on the 4th day of the following month. The original due date was the 26th of the previous month. Let's count the business days, excluding weekends, and the designated national holiday marked clearly on this calendar. She dictated the calculation, running through the dates methodically, verbally building the wall that Wallace was now trapped behind. The total adjustment was precisely 8 business days, Mr. Wallace. 8. Your contract permits an adjustment of up to 10 business days without penalty. Is 8 greater than 10? The silence now was crushing. It was the moment the bravado completely dissolved, replaced by a stark, naked understanding of failure. Wallace gripped the railing, swaying slightly. He had come here confident, relying on noise to mask his fundamental ignorance of the document he himself signed. He hadn't just exaggerated. He had built an entire case upon a delay that was legally permissible under his own signed terms. He could not form a word. The judge waited. The camera lingered on his face, documenting the precise instant the realization of intellectual defeat hit him, a physical tremor that traveled through his shoulders. The answer, Mr. Wallace, is no, the judge supplied, her voice ringing with finality. 8 is less than 10. The defendant, therefore, was entirely within the contractual rights agreed upon by both parties and specifically permitted by the clause you initialed. She leaned back slightly in her seat, the movement small but impactful, signifying the end of the deliberation. Your entire claim rests on the premise of a breach of contract resulting from an unauthorized delay, she stated, folding her hands neatly on the bench. The evidence shows, quite clearly, that the delay was neither unauthorized nor a breach. It was a contractual liberty. She fixed him with a stare that brooked no debate. You came in here, Mr. Wallace, shouting about ruined deals and gross negligence, hoping that the volume of your performance would distract this court from the simple math required to read your own agreement. His mouth opened, perhaps to protest, to offer one last frantic defense, but no sound escaped. The defeat was absolute. He had been defeated by Clause C, Section 4. The judge delivered the judgment with the same calm authority, the lack of anger making the ruling far more brutal than any yelling could have achieved. Judgment for the defendant. The plaintiff, Mr. Wallace, recovers nothing. Case dismissed. She slammed the gavel down once. The sharp, declarative sound was the punctuation mark on his intellectual annihilation. Wallace stood frozen, his face flushed and then alarmingly pale. He looked utterly diminished, a bully stripped of his volume. He had tried to use the legal system as a shortcut, attempting to leverage television spectacle and manufactured outrage to circumvent basic contractual obligations. He lost not because of an unfair technicality, but because he was lazy, dishonest, and had underestimated the singular focus of the woman on the bench. He slowly gathered his papers, the movements clumsy and slow. He didn't meet the eyes of the defendant, who was quietly weeping tears of relief, nor did he look at the judge. He merely shuffled off the set, the strut he entered with completely extinguished. The brilliance of the moment wasn't the swiftness of the ruling, but the method. There was no theatrical cross-examination,
No angry outburst. No personal attack from the judge. There was only the calm, relentless application of logic and the rules the plaintiff himself agreed to uphold. She let him hang himself with his own fine print. The episode went viral instantly. The comment sections were unified in their praise, not just for the verdict, but for the unwavering patience that preceded it. The clip was titled, "The Quiet Authority. Judge Destroys Scammer with a Single Contract Clause." Viewers celebrated the rare victory of precise analysis over performative noise. It was a potent reminder that truth often speaks softly, using evidence as its megaphone. The judge understood that authority is not about how loudly you speak, but how meticulously you prepare and how calmly you apply the existing structure against chaos. She didn't just win the case. She delivered a masterclass in professional composure, demonstrating that the coldest weapon in a courtroom is the undisputed fact. The world needs more people like this. Share if you agree.